Great. Okay. Hello, everyone. So this is the first session of the maintainer onboarding for the VSCode Workflow extension. Pretty much like this about ramping up the familiarity of the people participating here in this session with the VS Code Workflow extension project. So maybe you can like start doing maintainership and helping us with the maintainership of the project. So I'm glad that besides me, I'm gonna be hosting the session, but also Tomas is here, who is probably the actual master
Hello,
of this
everyone.
project and expert. Thanks for joining, Thomas, and thank you everyone also for joining and your interest on doing maintainership on the VS Code extension. I know that probably all of you have done some work in the extension, right? I've been reviewing MRs from you, Dennis, and also from Ilya. Alexander, have you ever worked on the extension so far?
No, but it sounded interesting, so I signed up to learn about it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's the right attitude. So let me share my screen for a moment. This is, by the way, this is not the first session that we've run. Tomas a couple of months ago had an onboarding session that we recorded and where I participated to actually become a maintainer. And I highly recommend watching the 4 sessions that we recorded then. We were working on implementing some refactorings to move a feature of the extension from the desktop version to the common version. So in that way, that feature could work in both the web IDE and desktops. So highly recommended. Basically, what we are gonna do in this session is following the same format. We are gonna do a pairing session where we are gonna try tackling an issue, a refactoring or implementing some feature. Ideally, this issue what should show you some key aspect of the architecture of the extension. Sounds good? Awesome. So the issue that we decided to tackle, at least in this session, is related to telemetry. So let me give you some context. Recently, while we were implementing the code suggestions feature in the extension, one of the requirements was implementing some sort of telemetry using a Snowplow for code suggestions. We implemented a very simple Snowplow class, and this class had to work for both web IDE and desktop. We implemented some code that is duplicated, and we are gonna talk about how we are architecting splitting the code for web IDE and desktop later. There is some repetition of the code for the web IDE, for the web and the desktop version of extension, and in this session we want to abstract that repeated code and create a single service that we can use in both places. The advantage of this issue is that of tackling this issue in this session is that we are gonna have some exposure to the concept of GitLab platform. That is the abstraction that we are using to implement code that is different across platforms, but that we can use that we can inject to the code that we are using, like the common code that we are using in desktop and web. I was thinking what would be like the best way of like getting started with this concept. And I think that a recommendation is first to go to the architecture documentation. These docs explain super well all the concept about the GitLab platform and how we are organizing the repository to have to publish versions of the extension for web and desktop. As explained here, we have well, let me open also VS Code here. So this is the extension repo. This is the source directory. And at glance, you can see that we have, well, besides the assets folder, we have 3 directories: desktop, browser, and common. What we are trying to do is that to move as many features from the desktop version of extension, that is the first one implemented, to the common directory. So it is source code that we can use both in web and desktop. And according to the documentation, what we want to put in the common folder is code that only relies on 2 dependencies. The first one is all the VSCode extension API. That is the API published by the web IDE to access their services, building commands, extending data, etc. Because this is available, all of it, both for the web, for VS Code web, and also for the VS Code desktop. And then the other part, the parts that are not exposed by this API, the dependency that we want to create is the GitLab platform. So the GitLab platform would be an API that gives you access to all of the GitLab services. Imagine that you want to fetch a project, you want to access a user account, or well, other things. Probably Tomas can expand on those categories. But what we want to do is that you don't have to implement those concerns twice. You just like for both platforms, you can just have access to this interface and make a GitLab API request or obtain a GitLab object, and it's gonna be platform agnostic. So, having said that, one of the things that we want to do with the telemetry is moving those telemetry concerns to this GitLab platform. So in that way, we don't have repeated code. Make sense? Cool.
Maybe I'll just expand on the platform a tiny bit. I'm not sure how much we changed it in the last 2.5 months. I wasn't here, but like just in general, the original idea was that the platform is abstracting the desktop version and the web IDE, and lots of things are different. For example, the thing that differs the most is authenticated requests to a GitLab API. In desktop, you have to have a token that you set up somewhere in your OS keychain, or the extension does it for you, and that token is used to make queries from the Node library, like cross-fetch, that we are using. In a browser, this is actually implemented by a little bit of trickery when it sends a message to a mediator command. We are trying to remove it, if I'm not mistaken, Enrique, but it communicates with the web IDE and says, use the cookie that's stored in a browser and make a request to the API authenticated with that cookie. And you are not setting up any account because you already have the account. So that's one example. And I'll give one more example of what I was thinking that we would be putting into the platform. And it's, for example, when you are getting a permalink, right, it's not implemented yet, but that's like one of the examples that is in my head. When you are getting permalink for a line of code and you want to say, give me a GitLab link that points to this commit in this file and this line. In desktop, you just do git blame on that line, get the commit, and then construct the link. But in a web browser, you actually might not know what the commit is because you only have the last you only have the ref where you open the web IDE, but you don't have a full history of Git history for each file. So you might have to do a little bit more trickery. And so you can abstract this away inside of the platform-specific implementation, and your common code just says, give me like the commit for this line, like blame this line, and the different platforms implement it differently. So that's just my expansion on Enrique's great introduction into our architecture.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, pretty much when you are working in the extension for desktop, you have access as it's documented here. You have access to the Git binaries, to any Node.js API, to the file system, and in the web ID you don't have access to any of that. What we implemented was some abstractions to create some sort of Git API on top of the GitLab web services that are exposed to push and to commit and to pull and that kind of operations. So this GitLab platform is in charge of abstracting the common features of the extension from those differences between the platforms. Okay, so let's go to the common folder. And in the common folder, there is a directory called platform. And here you will find the platform interface that has two methods. That is what we are currently extracting. That the first one, fetch from API to make HTTP requests, get user agent. I guess, Thomas, this is because we are providing a custom user agent for the desktop version, right?
Correct. Behavior differs because in the desktop version we can set the user agent. In web ID we actually can't. So this returns an empty map if it's in a browser, because it doesn't make sense in a browser to set user agent because browser always uses its user agent. And we could have done two things. We could have put it in a platform, or we could do some trickery with saying, like, if window global object is present, do it this way. And if it isn't, do it that way. But we decided that we won't be doing that trickery ever. And we will try to abstract it away in a platform so it's more explicit, and we don't have our code base just riddled with ifs. If window exists, do this, else do that.
So let's jump to the topic at hand. That is how we are doing telemetry and what is the difference between telemetry for the web IDE and setting up telemetry for the desktop versions. So in the initial implementation, we created two files, set up telemetry browser and set up telemetry desktop. Why we did it like this? There is a difference in, well, first, when we are implementing telemetry in a VSCode extension, the guidelines that VSCode recommends are that we have to respect the user's telemetry preferences. Probably not necessarily only that, but what VSCode says, but it's the right thing to do. So we want to actually adhere to that And to fetch the telemetry preferences from the user that the user has, it is different in the desktop and in the web ID. In the case of the desktop, we have to use the VSCode API and access the eTelemetry enabled property from the environment object. But in the web ID, we don't have that. Because we completely disabled telemetry in that environment for different reasons, but mainly because we don't want to enable telemetry once we have the extensions marketplace enabled, because there is a very ambiguous legal ground where we don't know how the telemetry rules that we have in the GitLab application conflicts with third-party code also tracking the user. So that's completely disabled in the web browser, in the web ID. What we want to do in that environment is just respecting the do not track signal that is coming from the web browser. So we exposed one API from the web ID. Let's find it here. That is pretty much like obtaining the web ID extension. That extension is going to expose an eTelemetry enabled method that we are going to use to obtain the do not track signal. So what we want to do is that we are going to move eTelemetry enabled, and we are going to move this one here, the access to the VSCode API into the GitLab platform. So everything else here and here can just be moved to the common directory. And in that way, we are going to have a single version of the setup telemetry function. Make sense?
When you are saying everything in this file that you have opened now, the telemetry browser can move in common, but we are calling on line 6 the get web ID exports, which is specifically getting the web ID extension that's only available in web IDE. We won't be still able to move this into the common code, or will we?
Oh no, this is gonna be we're gonna move the web ID exports to the GitLab platform implementation in the web ID.
Gotcha. And Snowplow is our, yeah, okay, that's our interface. So that's some interface that lets us submit the tracking events, I assume. And so the platform is going to be returning to Snowplow. That's what we are planning on doing.
No, what I thought we could do is that we could have a single setup telemetry function that accepts a GitLab platform. And then we could do just GitLab platform .eTelemetry enabled. And then like everything that is abstracted here, well, we could abstract how the telemetry is enabled, that inference in the GitLab platform, instead of like doing the entire Snowplow setup in there.
So do I understand correctly that from the browser, from this file, we would reference, it would be still in a browser only code, but we would reference the platform to know whether telemetry is enabled, and then keep on going as we are going. So pretty much exactly what you've just added or changed the 2 lines. That's what we would do.
It's a very fairly simple change, but in common we have a main entry point for the extension that accepts a platform manager. So we could have we could call setup telemetry here in the common main and just pass the platform manager to setup telemetry. But then this platform manager is coming either from the browser entry point or the desktop entry point, right?
But we wouldn't be able to call the setup telemetry from this common code because the setup telemetry code contains specific code to, like for a browser, contains specific code to obtain the extension, the WebID extension. Just like Ilya, Alexander, do you kind of get what this getting of another extension means? Maybe we can explain that with Enrique, so it's not just like two of us discussing it.
Why don't you explain a little bit further just to make sure?
Okay. Well, maybe Enrique, if you could go to the Git extension. I love the Git example, or I could share a screen, whichever works for you.
Yeah, I can stop sharing my screen so you have control over what you're explaining.
Okay. I'll share my screen. And please don't have any tokens in my. That's my usual. There is only expired, so that's good. But probably because I already had one password opened, unless somebody wants to cut it off, then this is going to be a private video. I do it every time. I'm sorry. So what I want to show you is we're just going to open this. It's already opened. We have the VSCode API allows extensions to provide API for other extensions to consume. It's like a little Russian doll kind of a thing. It's we use it with Git API. So there is and I open the Git extension wrapper. You can call. Enrique showed you how it works with the WebID extension, and we are doing it here in Git extension wrapper for the native. I call them native. I guess that there might be a better word, but something that's already shipped with VS Code. So, for example, here when I open this whole thing is powered by this VSCode.git extension that's part of every VS Code build, and you already have it. And it starts as soon as you have a Git in your repository, like probably even without Git, it starts every time and checks whether there are any repositories. When you see here that it opens two repositories, that's something that you can then retrieve. Every extension that imports the Git extension can then work with the repositories. And so that's what we do here. There is a little bit strange kind of a pattern that they introduced, is that you have to, the Git extension here provides some interface, and you need to copy paste the type file with the interfaces and types into your project. That's what they recommend. So we copy pasted this TypeScript definitions, and that allows us here in the wrapper to say we are typing it as this Git extension. That's the type that we copy pasted. And so now this will give us whatever, I think, and I might be lying, but every extension has this this activate method. That's like the key method of where are we? Here somewhere. Register commands, activate. This is pretty much the only method that, like, only code that every extension has to have. And I think that what it returns, if it returns something, and Enrique probably knows how the WebID does it, so he's going to be more knowledgeable in this. But if it returns an object, that's what you can then import using this this kind of a syntax.
I'm gonna paste the relevant docs so you can look at it later.
Okay.
But yeah, it's basically like using a generic to type what we are getting from the export, right?
Yeah, this is what we copy pasted from the main main VS Code project. If I open it here and I would go to Microsoft VS Code, and they have these extensions, and here would be Git somewhere, and they pretty much say copy this type definition to your project and then import it like this. And so now when we were discussing with Enrique, there is this idea that the web IDE extension, and I'm just going to really quickly do Excalibur. So, new one. I delete this somehow. Reset canvas. Yeah. So there is this currently, and correct me if I'm wrong, Enrique, but there is this situation where we have a web IDE extension. This is web IDE. It's a little bit confusing, but web IDE is what we call the VS Code with all the extension that we show in a browser. But also we have web IDE extension, which is the main thing that takes VS Code and makes it into our GitLab web IDE. It understands the GitLab project, and it understands how to commit files and how to query our API, all that. And then we have here mediator commands. And this is our kind of layer. I'm not even sure whether it lives in web IDE. I think it lives outside of web IDE, and we kind of inject it as a configuration into web IDE. And here we would have workflow, which is the GitLab VS Code extension that we are looking at the whole time. And now, like both of these kind of communicate with, like when they want to make API requests, they communicate with the mediator commands. But this is not what we want. We would like the web IDE to expose an API, like make a commit or get revision file, or like file at the revision and stuff like that. And this would be exposed same as we saw that the Git extension like gives you this, like for example, you can take the repository, and on the repository you can apply div with, like you can all these methods. We would do the same type, and I think we are already doing it, if I'm not mistaken, for some things. And like this is what the workflow will import. Then it needs to import or load the web IDE extension and then call the methods on it. And so now when we were with Enrique, we were discussing the dependency of like what part of code loads the web IDE. And that's obviously only browser specific because desktop doesn't have this web IDE module that will be providing us with some features. So that's what we were discussing. Any questions?
No, thank you. And I remember you explaining some of this in the previous session recordings. So thank you for going back over it.
All right, cool. I'm going to stop sharing, and we can discuss the way how we extract is telemetry enabled.
Thank you, Thomas. It was a really cool explanation. Again, I just like built on top of that. And show what is the version of that API that we are exposing, like in the same API that Thomas showed about for the Git extension, and to use those services in other extension. We are doing the same for the web IDE. So we have this web IDE file in common/platform/web IDE, where we are basically defining types for all of the services that the web IDE extension is providing to the VSCode Workflow extension. So when it runs in a browser environment. And the relevant interface in this case, when we are doing the export, is a web IDE extension interface, and it's exposing an is telemetry enabled. So that would be like the parallel to Git. So Thomas, what I was thinking is that we could move these get web ID exports. Let me step back a little bit. So we have the GitLab platform interface here, and the GitLab platform manager. And then we're implementing this interface in the browser directory. It's called GitLab platform browser. And we're implementing the web version of this. As Tomas explained previously, in the desktop version of the extension, we are using a more standard approach for authentication, where we are using OAuth and all of that. But the web ID is using this mediator command architecture, where we are authenticating the requests, the HTTP requests, using a cookie-based authentication. So we are not having tokens or any of that. We're just like having a very simple implementation to send HTTP requests. So the plan for the implementation plan for the telemetry to have a single telemetry enabled is to go to the GitLab platform interface, add a telemetry enable method that returns a boolean. And then here implement, I think it's here. Oh, it's not picking the type here, just like giving this header. So I'm gonna make, we can add the telemetry enabled.
It's not picking the type just because the platform base is like, plain object. If we put there colon GitLab platform base, or how we call it, then it would be.
So we can move, where is the web ID exports? We can move this call and export the type for the type quickly. And then we can just return the telemetry. Let me first assign this to a variable here, web ID extension. So we can return telemetry enabled in this method. And why is this failing? Oh, of course, to return. In the case of this is undefined, we have to return false. So if we implement this telemetry enabled in the web version of the platform using this, if we open the setup telemetry desktop, we can just return do the same for the desktop version of the platform and return VSCode.m.enabled. In that way, we're gonna have a single Snowflow setup for both platforms. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't realize that the setup of the Snowplow get instance is the same, except for the is telemetry enabled. I didn't know that it's the only logic that differs. Then that makes sense. That will work.
Oh, but I have a question. So what do you think about having one of the things that I've been questioning myself over the last 2 months and working on the extension is, why do we do like we could have a different interface that is not called GitLab platform, but it's called telemetry enabled, and we could put it in the common directory and implement it in browser and desktop. But we are putting it in GitLab platform. So it seems like over time this API will grow to have many responsibilities. Like for a wide range of necessities, from telemetry to HTTP requests. So what do you think about that, like between those approaches? Maybe like either split GitLab platform into several services that are implemented in browser or desktop, or just having a single object?
I think it would be a premature optimization for now, probably. We don't know how big it will be at some point.
I definitely think that we assumed that it's going to grow and grow and grow. And as you, Enrique, said, it's like a mixed bag of like everything is going to go there. Everything that's different between browser and desktop. Same as Denise, I was thinking that we will just be putting stuff in there till it bursts. And I don't know what the definition of that is, whether it's like 10 unrelated methods or 20. Like it's definitely going to be painful to like then go and you know when you have this like a large interface and everything depends on it, going later in and figuring out this only depends on telemetry and API calls, and this only depends on Git access and telemetry. Like it's going to be a little bit hard to, or let's say much harder than if we were separating it from the beginning. But at the same time, I think that we will have a better chance of finding the right abstractions. And through introducing abstraction early can then make other people be like, somebody already had thought about it hard. They figured out that this is the interface that we should follow. And like we might be, setting ourselves for abstraction that might not make sense when we introduce another 10 methods. So that was my thinking.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like it's also easier to discover, right? Like you have everything in a single place at the moment, so it also improves the developer experience. Oh, Dennis, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to. I don't remember exact thing that I was working with. Like definitely it was related to chat, of course, the chat extension. But at some point I was about to extend the platform again, as well with some method that had to be different between desktop and browser, and I went on with that solution. I pushed the merge request, but then the point is that technically I don't remember whether somebody helped me or how we discussed this. I think it was even Tomasz before he left for the parental leave. So we figured out that the way it has been implemented wasn't really the optimal one. So we found a way to not extend the platform and do things much cleaner with just one with the shared platform method in the common folder. However, if
I think it was something with UUID or something, or some
something.
crypto.
Yeah. Yes. We had to
when we are doing nonce for the web.
Exactly, because the crypto is not available in the browser, so we had to like the first idea was to extend the platform and like let crypto to be running for the desktop and then in the browser to come up with some other solution. But then we figured out that technically the solution that we would come up with for the browser would be sufficient for the desktop. However, it was exactly because of this uncomfortable feeling of the need to extend the platform. Like, should it have all the abstractions in place and have a very comfortable path to extend the platform? I think I would stick to that idea and wouldn't really think more about optimizing this. But actually, when you realize that whatever you do needs platform extension, it kind of gives this psychological pressure on you to think twice before you really do that, because there might be another way to do this. So I would really like us not to rush with any abstractions in this regard at the moment.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Denis. Okay, so we have the implementation plan. Let's try to give it a try and do the refactoring, and just inject move the telemetry enabled call to the GitLab platform. So while I was looking at this implementation of this telemetry enabled, I see here that this might be a little problem, that we are also like listening to this event, change telemetry enabled, and changing the value of this boolean to pass it here. But I think that what we could do in the case of the desktop version is, well, probably using a closure as well, and just every time that the method is called in a Snowplow get instance, it's gonna get the updated version of the telemetry state. Yeah, I think that this is going to work. Just like thinking out loud here. Okay, so we have is telemetry enabled. Let's implement and add a test for the browser version first. We have Git platform browser.
Can I, Enrique, just maybe ask you how the Snowplow is used? Now I understand it correctly that you can give it enabled and it's either function or a Boolean flag. Is that correct? Like when you were now discussing, yeah.
I don't remember actually. Let me see. Let me open the Snowplow options interface. No, it's actually a callback. It's always.
So it's always a. Okay. So I assume that that's something we will be calling every time we want to make send an event to Snowplow, that it's going to be asking this enabled callback. That's
my assumption, that every time that we are sending an event, we are checking the state. Here it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So it seems like everything is working all right. Cool.
Yeah, that's really useful because you can get easily entangled into, if you try to like listen on changes on VSCode state and keep your local like a cache or copy of the data up to date, it usually complicates the code heaps, and most of the time it's premature optimization. Unless you are making API calls, it's always okay to ask like this for the latest value every time you want to do something, unless you figure out with profiling or just user testing that it's too slow. I would always recommend doing exactly what we are doing here.
Yeah, I think that there is a trade-off, because otherwise, if you try to optimize, then you have to manually update the state and be deliberate about the idea that, oh, this got obsolete. Now I have to go and change it somehow. So relying on a method is easier.
You will see it often in how we work with the config. So user configures the VS Code with JSON config, and sometimes we can ask for the config before an action is triggered, but sometimes we need to know, whether we are, I don't know, I'll say something stupid, like whether we are actually listening on Git changes. And if it was a config, then that's something that we need to, every time user says, stop listening on Git changes, we need to like recognize that as an event and remove our listeners on Git changes. And every time they change it back to start listening, we need to again put on new listeners on the Git extension, something like that. So in our extension, some of the more complex pieces of code are listening on config changes and changing the extension behavior based on what the user wants.
That's interesting. I guess that the reason that the VS Code API is so event-based is that maybe they want the UI to react to the to any change in the state, but that's not always necessary to the extension. Like there are functionality that are triggered by the user. That's where you want to fetch the state and the latest version of the state, and you don't need to be event-based on those scenarios.
Exactly. When a user triggers a command, those are like the nicest things to implement. When somebody press Command Shift B and says, show me like blame for this line or something, that's so nice because you can do everything like synchronously, or not synchronously, but everything like procedurally, just like give me this data, manipulate it. But when it's listening on user changed something in a text file and user opened the new file, those are much harder.
Oh, well, that's starting in the test for is telemetry enabled to the GitLab platform. I see that we need an instance of the platform manager here. I think this is the first time that I implementing a test for this object. So I don't know how. Oh, it seems like we have a factory method that is coming from the same GitLab platform browser. So I don't have to do a complex setup. I'm going just to copy this into this test and remove the mod commands because I won't need it. So the only thing that we want to assert is that the manager is returning what the web ID extension API is returning. So we're gonna have to mock that API. And probably want to test the true and false cases.
That might be the reason why we had the code that gets you the web ID extension in a separate function. It always makes it easier to mock.
Yeah, that's the kind of things that Paul would do, right? Like always like trying to come up with that kind of abstractions. But probably like the easy thing to do here is just like to go to the test here, and yeah, and he just has this just.mock method that we can rely on.
But we also have the mocked, the whole VS Code is mocked in unit tests, which is also an important thing to mention to any contributor. The unit tests are not using VS Code at all. They don't, because the VS Code object is dynamically injected at runtime to the real extension. Only integration tests are working with the real deal. The unit tests are using in __ mocks. We have VS Code JS, which has like a naive implementation of everything that we use from the VS Code API. And so here there should be something like get extension, and we could just mock that instead of having a separate module for that. But that might be like a next step improvement. We don't have to redesign the whole thing now.
Right. If you see that you are using a method that is not working or it's not available, you can just go to src/mocks and make a simple implementation here. Okay, so let's go back to the browser. I have to import web ID exports. Um, through web. Hey, returns. Telemetry status on the web ID extension. We have a web ID exports.
Does anyone know what's the like a $sign syntax for these descriptions? Because when you are using the each, it lets you
Percent, I think.
just percent. Yeah.
No, wait a second. It's the Boolean, right?
Yeah.
I think it's just percent.
And
Makes sense.
isn't it tailored to a data type?
Yeah, it is, but it's like if you just use the percent, I think it will just stringify it. It will just no percent. I think, yeah. I don't know. I might say nonsense now. Probably Ilya is the right person to ask this, but
I think it might be percent test to forcibly stringify it, but it's
Yeah.
just my assumption also.
let's just try this. This is how it works. You just put some nonsense, try it out. If it works, then it becomes the pattern.
And then you get paid.
That's the important part. That's my favorite part.
See what is the return value of the get ID for exports. It doesn't even have actually has a web ID extension undefined. So I would have to return the entire data type here to make it. Luckily, this only has a single parameter, a single method in the interface, so it makes it easier. We're gonna get a platform. Doesn't matter what I put here.
Not for the web version now.
Okay.
Just a little explanation of what the user initiated parameter here means. When you have the desktop extension, you can have multiple projects. And when you want an active project, there is a difference. If it's not user initiated, we are either there is a certain, we are certain that you want one of the projects. For example, you have a file open in that project. So we will give you that project. And if you don't have any file open and you have multiple projects and user didn't initiate it, we return undefined. But if user initiated it, like manually, for example, he pressed or she pressed Command Shift P and triggered something, so they are expecting interactive mode, then the desktop platform would show a quick pick with like select which project you want to do. But we also use this, for example, when we are asking for a CI pipeline status and you don't want to show users some interactive quick pick every 30 seconds, regardless of whether they clicked something or not. So that's the Boolean parameter there.
And the same will be true for accounts, right? The subversion also supports multiple accounts.
Correct. Multiple accounts, multiple projects, multiple remotes. It's very complicated and it's nowhere near as simple as just like GitLab.com and one project on it.
Oh, this is a promise. Let's do a sync here. Let's see. Says that
It
this is
doesn't
a
compile,
type
I
error.
think, somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's in the GitLab platform browser.
Is it related to the fact that is telemetry enabled should be the callback? It is callback here, right?
Hmm. Type false or Boolean. Should I say I want to type Boolean? Oh, this is a method.
This is this method, yeah. This is the callback here. Yeah.
There it is. Hmm. It seems like we also have to, and now I understand why we have these mock commands for initial setup. The whole point was like, well, let me go back and give some context. This is probably important. So the get platform for active project, part of the return value is the actual project that we are gonna use as a context to make HTTP requests. Imagine that we want to fetch a merge request or a branch or a pipeline from a project. So in the case of the web ID, where you can only have a single project, that is the one that you have open in the web browser, the GitLab platform is going to fetch that project using the fetch from API method. So in the test environment, we have to mock that API call to make the test pass. So we are a little bit over time. We're gonna make this call here and see if it passes. And there is one that is failing. But not to go too much over time, I can commit these changes and we can continue in the next session. What do you think? Or do you want to wrap it up?
I have to drop off, but it's either way works great for me. But in completely unrelated news, the simple percent didn't stringify to anything meaningful. So
That's
just nonsense there. Yeah.
What is the
So,
telemetry percentage?
yeah, telemetry percentage. That probably is percent s if you want to stringify it, but that's something different. Yeah.
Well,
So whatever you guys decide on to do, whether it's to stay or drop off, I will just watch the end of this video later to figure out what was the decision. Thanks a lot for this session, Enrique.
no, thank you for coming by.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, I think that that's the whole point of having Git, right? We can just like stop here and continue later. So thank you, really, and see you in the next session. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.